PM Lee announcing changes to his cabinet, with Lawrence Wong getting a promotion to Deputy Prime Minister. Planning for the next 50 years and more, the URA envisions new housing, parks and heritage areas for Singapore. And a man who transited through Changi Airport has tested positive for monkeypox. Hello, you're watching The Big Story. I'm Lin Li Fu. Do subscribe to the Straits Times channel to access more news and updates. Now, first up, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong announcing changes to his cabinet and other political appointments this afternoon, with one major promotion. Lawrence Wong will be appointed Deputy Prime Minister with effect from June 13. Mr Wong will be the acting Prime Minister in the absence of PM Lee. He continues as Finance Minister. He will also oversee the strategy group within the Prime Minister's office, taking over this role from Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat. DPM Heng continues as Deputy Prime Minister. The cabinet has traditionally had two Deputy PMs since the 1980s. The announcement comes 2 months after Mr Wong was endorsed by his peers as the leader of the People's Action Party's fourth generation team. In a Facebook post, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong writes, "The next generation leadership is taking shape. I ask everyone to give your full support to this important transition to steer Singapore safely out of the pandemic and into a brighter future." Other political appointments announced today: Tan Kiat Hau will be promoted to Senior Minister of State. He continues in the Ministry of Communications and Information and the Ministry of National Development. Chee Hong Tat will be appointed Senior Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance to help Lawrence Wong. Mr Chee continues in the Ministry of Transport. He will relinquish his role as NTUC Deputy Secretary General. Desmond Tan will be appointed Minister of State in the Prime Minister's office. He will relinquish his appointments in the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment. He will replace Chee Hong Tat as NTUC Deputy Secretary General. Now let's discuss these movements with opinion editor Grace Ho. Grace, firstly, help us underscore the significance of Lawrence Wong's promotion. Is this a necessary step to cement his standing as PM Lee's successor, given that he's already PAP's 4G leader?
Well, you can't be PM unless you're first DPM. And in this regard, I would say that two words describe today's cabinet reshuffle and promotion. It's unambiguous and it's non-disruptive. It's unambiguous because it formally makes Mr Wong, who, as you pointed out, was named in April as 4G leader, the Deputy Prime Minister. And also driving home his standing as number 2 was the announcement that he will be acting PM when Mr Lee is away, even as Mr Heng Swee Keat remains in place as the other DPM. The second point about being non-disruptive is that I think the reshuffle is on a smaller scale than the last one in April last year, which saw almost half of the 15 ministries getting new ministers. And that particular change of guard had taken place 2 weeks after DPM Heng's surprise announcement that he would step aside as the 4G leader. So apart from cementing his position, I should also add that like the passing of the 4G leadership baton in April to Mr Wong, this reshuffle is largely uneventful. Not in a negative sense at all, because continuity and stability are valued in any political transition. And the lack of any other major changes to the cabinet puts the focus squarely on Mr Wong's consolidating position as number 2.
As we saw earlier in his Facebook post, PM Lee says the next generation leadership is taking shape. Now, aside from Mr Wong, who are the faces that are becoming more prominent in this reshuffle?
Well, there are no full ministerial level movements this time round. So I think in the grand scheme of things, the focus is still very much on Mr Wong. And the other key 4G leaders, Mr Chan Chun Sing, Mr Ong Yi Kang, remain where they are. But in terms of the other promotions, Mr Tan Kiat Hau will be promoted to Senior Minister of State, Mr Eric Chua as Senior Parliamentary Secretary, Rahayu Mazam to Senior Parliamentary Secretary as well. But again, these are not the ministerial level movements. But apart from these sort of prominent faces and reshuffling, what's also important is continuity, as I mentioned earlier. So the retention of the senior ministers, Teo Chee Hean and Tharman Shanmugaratnam, also show that both still have roles to play in supporting and guiding the 4G leaders as they take over from the 3G team.
So what challenges must Mr Wong and his team deal with between now and the next general election, which must be held by November 2025?
Well, there are obviously some near-term challenges to deal with, from rising inflation and trying to keep the cost of public goods and services down, to coping with the economic and political fallout from the still ongoing COVID-19, the Ukraine crisis, and the many knock-on effects on food supply, supply chains, and so on. But I mean, even casting one's eye to the medium term in the run-up to the elections by 2025 and the longer term, there's also the issue of refreshing the social compact, which Mr. Wong has alluded to before. He spoke of considering what we need to do differently, but also affirming what is being done well and how we can do it even better. He had called this a Forward Singapore agenda, which will set out the roadmap for the next 10 years and beyond. The roadmap is to be a major undertaking of the 4G team and will be formally launched soon. So one hopes that there will be some details coming out within the year. But essentially, it's a tall order, I think, to develop a fairer, greener, and more inclusive Singapore, which has been the mantra that's been repeated across quite a few platforms over the past year, in the midst of what are really rather grave uncertainties, and also amidst what I think are very polarizing views, both online and offline. So how do we get Singaporeans to understand that Singapore citizenship is not a spectator sport? And how do we learn to accommodate, to give and take, and find common ground while moving Singapore forward? I think that is the greatest overarching challenge.
Thank you very much for your insights. Grace Ho there, the Straits Times Opinion editor. You can find out more details about the cabinet reshuffle over at straitstimes.com. Now, what will Singapore look like in the next 50 years? We got a glimpse into the Urban Redevelopment Authority's latest long-term plan unveiled today. Among the key things, public housing will be built at Bayshore and Upper Changi as part of a broader plan to mix public and private housing island-wide. And to address calls for more inclusive housing towns, URA says government agencies will plan for more towns and estates with both public and private homes. Shifting to plans for Paya Lebar, not too far from my neighbourhood actually. After the airbase is relocated in the 2030s, the site will be transformed into a new town with housing and recreational facilities, where the old runway could be a focal point. The 800 hectares of land will also provide space for businesses to offer employment opportunities. And if you like walking or cycling through the rail corridor, 4 more identity corridors will be created. As the name suggests, these are aimed at strengthening the identity of distinctive places and safeguarding the nation's heritage. The 4 new corridors are the Thomson-Kallang Corridor, the Marina Bay Southern Ridges Corridor, an inner ring linking fringe districts around the city centre, and the Geylang-Changi Corridor that is branded Historic East. For more on the move to the greater mix of private and public housing, let's speak with property analyst Nicholas Mark. He's head of research and consultancy at ERA Real Estate. Nicholas, Bayshore, Simei, Marina East and South, Sembawang North, Sengkang West, these are some areas identified for a private and public housing mix. What do you make of these choices?
Well, I think that all these locations have something in common, which is that there is a relatively large area that is still vacant and available for future development. Take, for example, in the Bayshore area, if any one of us were to drive or take a taxi to Changi Airport, you'll come across one part of it before you reach Changi Airport where there's a lot of trees on the northern part of the ECP. And this is part of this particular Bayshore area. It's between, it's somewhere near the new and upcoming Bayshore MRT stations. So the government has already built MRT stations there, and they basically is just waiting for the future development of the piece of land there for housing, commercial, and also other type of amenities.
Now, do you foresee any effect on housing prices in these areas when URA's upcoming plans come to fruition?
Well, I don't think it is the government's intention to move the needle a bit too much on the housing prices when they were to develop these areas. But I think it will have a positive impact on housing prices. First and foremost, these developments that will come out are fairly new, and so they may set new benchmark prices in that location. And for private housing there, the land will be sold through the government land sale program, and developers who are still quite hungry for land, I think the future potential of these locations and may bid quite aggressively for lands there. Of course, that depends on the market conditions at the time that the land tender is closed. And this may also set new benchmark prices in some of these locations. But I think the government will release this land in a very moderated pace so as not to cause either an oversupply of housing in that location or to release it too slowly and cause a backlog of shortages.
What are other pros and cons of this move to mix things up?
Well, I think it's quite positive because, you see, in some of these locations, like for example, in the Marina South area, and there is no public housing in those locations. The government, in its move to try to have build a more integrated communities where it's not just going to be a pure private residential area, a private residential enclave, which is only for the more well-to-do. I think it's quite positive to mix both private and public housing together so that we can have a more integrated society where people of all socio-economic classes are able to mix together.
Are there any cons to this move at all?
Generally, I think the benefits are going to outweigh the shortcomings. But if there's any shortcomings, it will be more of the case of some of the public housing that's going to be released in this location due to their expected popularity are going to be under the PLH, the Public Housing in Prime Location model, which means that buyers of these HDB flats will have certain restrictions, like, for example, a 10-year minimum occupation period. There will be a subsidy clawback, as well as they'll be subject to income ceilings. So that might be one of the downside, which means that buyers of these HDB flats, if they are not willing to accept these restrictions, they may be excluded from applying and buying these HDB flats.
Nicholas Mark, ERA Real Estate's Head of Research and Consultancy. In other news, a man who transited through Singapore to Australia has tested positive for monkeypox. The passenger arrived at Changi Airport from Barcelona on June 2nd and remained in the transit holding area until his departure for Sydney. He didn't visit other areas in the airport. While there's currently no significant risk of community transmission, the Health Ministry has conducted contact tracing for the 2 affected flights, and 13 people who may have had casual contact with the traveller have been put on phone surveillance for 21 days. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong launching a new national helpline to help seniors in need. Available Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m, the ACES Care Helpline will respond to emergency calls and provide support services like helping seniors order food online and booking or rescheduling their medical appointments. The number 6797-6797 will be manned by trained senior volunteers. Now, those of you hoping to secure tickets for this year's National Day Parade can apply for them starting today. Just head over to the official NDP website. You have until noon on June 20th. Meanwhile, unauthorized flying of kites and drones over much of Singapore will be banned on selected days until August 9th to protect low-flying aircraft participating in performances. For more information, the public can check the onemap.sg website or the OneMap app. And in tennis, Rafael Nadal assuring fans that he will play at Wimbledon if his body allows. He won a record 14th French Open title while playing with a chronic left foot injury that required daily injections to numb the pain. The Spaniard addressed questions about his future and whether he'll skip Wimbledon, which is due to start in 3 weeks.
A player like me, I am always ready to play Wimbledon. So if you ask me if I will be in Wimbledon, I can't give you a clear answer. If I want to win Wimbledon, of course. So let's see how the treatment works. I don't know. I don't want to talk about how many injections I had because, as you can imagine, I had to take a lot of anti-inflammatories too. But before every single match, I had to do a couple of injections too.
And as always, visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Lin Li Fu. Thanks for watching The Big Story.